What? Alright folks, as you know, it's right around Halloween time. Time for ghosts, goblins, and ghouls, bad stuff and everything. We got a story for you. It takes place here in Gadsden, Alabama. It's called The Witch of Hinds Road. Now the story goes back to what I'm assuming would be like the early 1900s. We know it ended in 1930 or 32, depending on the story. How long it went on, we don't know. But here's the gist of it. There was a witch that lived here. Her name was Sarah Torbett, or Lucille Clayton, depending on which version of the story you hear. And she sold her soul to the devil. She became a witch. She also had this huge, gigantic hellhound. And what she would do was when people, especially kids, wandered on the property, she'd grab them up, she'd kidnap them, she'd kill them, she'd throw them in that pond right there, or she would take them up this road to her cave. When she got to the cave, horrible things would happen. She would usually kill them, then she'd eat them. Afterwards, she would bathe in their blood to keep her young, and some say she even drank their blood. Now, that depends on which version of the story you hear. Pretty creepy stuff, I would say. Now, this went on for quite some time. The citizens of Alabama City were terrorized, their kids were terrorized. Imagine being a parent and knowing that there's a serial killer in your area that is killing your kids, doing horrible things to them, and nobody's helping you. Imagine, that's like a parent's worst nightmare. You know, I can't imagine somebody taking my kids and me going to law enforcement, nothing getting done. So anyways, this went on for quite some time. How long exactly, we don't know. Some stories say about 20 years, some stories say 30, some stories put it in a much shorter time period. Either way it goes, according to legend, in 1930 or 32, depending on which story you hear, townspeople of Alabama City had enough. They'd had it. Nobody was helping them. Their kids are getting killed. They had to do something about it, like any parent would. So what they did, the entire city got together. They decided they were going to come out here. They're going to put a stop to it. Now, yeah, everybody's scared, of course. Got a witch. She's got a hellhound. This area is really remote. Of course, the whole area back then was, but this area was especially remote. It still is today. So they're worried. Can you imagine them coming up the road, walking down to this pond that you're seeing right here where they knew their child's bodies had been found in, and they knew horrible things had happened to them, the rage had built inside them, how angry they were, how frustrated they were. The bloodlust, quite frankly, is what they were going for. And that's what they did. 1930 or 32, they marched up to her shack, which is in the woods right behind us, and they burned it to the ground. The witch, her child, and her dog, all three perished in that fire. After that, townspeople got together, swore everybody to secrecy, went on about their business, knowing in their hearts they'd done the right thing by getting rid of this menace to their area. Shortly after the witch passed away, folks coming along this road started seeing things, started hearing things. It just didn't make any sense. You had travelers who'd be walking down this road. Now picture this. This road's in the middle of nowhere. It's night, getting close to it. There's no houses along this strip of road, nothing. Just you and the road and the trees. You're walking past a site where you just did something that you had to do, but it was a horrible act to get rid of this witch. You come walking down this road, and all of a sudden you hear cackling coming from the woods. You don't know where it's coming from, but you can hear it. It's a woman's cackling, like hysterical. You start looking around, you're a little bit nervous. All of a sudden, right in front of you is the witch that you burned, that you know for a fact that you burned not long before that. And she comes up to you. She's acting crazy. And she tells you, I sold my soul to the devil. And she wanders off, cackling, disappears in the tree line again. That's what the lucky people got. And that's the lucky people would come walking down the same road, thinking the same things. Oh my gosh, I know what happened here, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, they'd hear a growl coming out of the darkness, out of the trees, from the pond, wherever. They'd stop and they'd slowly turn and they'd be looking into the eyes of the hellhound, which is sizing them up at that point. Its eyes fiery red, its teeth sharp and gnashing, ready to jump on them, and there's nothing they can do about it. Because now it's already dead. You can't kill what you've already killed. Just keep that in mind. Boom! Tell you folks, that's one heck of a story, ain't it? You got chills, you got thrills, you got cannibalism, you got blood drinking, you got all this crazy stuff. Right here in Gaston, Alabama, right behind these very steps that I'm sitting on right now. The bad thing is, kind of like the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, all that other stuff, man, it's fake. We're about to show you why. But first off, I got to say, Joseph Alexander Clayton, who's the gentleman who got this land from the federal government in 1855, first recognized owner, had great taste. I mean, take a look at this. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful through here. I would love to own this land. I tell you right now, I would love to own this land. You got your own private road that runs through it now. You got all these trees. You feel like you're in the middle of nowhere, but you're in the middle of Gadsden. You're right behind Nakalula Falls. Go think about that. Anyways, now we're getting to what we call the debunking part of the film, which is where we take that story that I just told you, which is frightening and everything, and we kind of break it down and, well, make you understand why it's complete and utter nonsense. See, I didn't cuss. So, first things first. We're going to dive into our suspects. Suspect number one, Sarah Torbett. Now, Sarah Torbett lived in this area. The only one we can find verified lived in this area about 1870. She left. She's in Texas by 1880. But Sarah Torbett was 14 when she left this area. She left, like I said, between 1870 and 1880. Her family never had ties to this land whatsoever. Not a one. There's no historical record that documents a Torbett owning this land. There's no historical record that documents anyone owning this land between 1855 and the mid-90s when a trust was formed and took over this section of land here. That part over here, part of it is owned by the city, but the majority of this is now in a trust. You can look that up. It's in public records. So Miss Torbett moved to Texas. Like I said, she lived there the rest of her life. She died in 1955, and as far as we know, she never came back. Now, does that mean that all the Torbetts are gone from this area? No, they're not. There's still Torbetts here. There is definitely a possibility that she might have had a cousin named Torbett that there is no historical record of. Because you got to think, when we're digging through this stuff, we're looking through probate records, we're looking through newspaper clippings, we're looking through stuff like that. If she didn't own any property, if she had never been written up for anything, you know, there would be no record of her. So that is a possibility. The only one that we know for a fact, and a lot of Torbetts did this, they moved to Wells, Texas, about 1880. She lived there until 1955 when she passed away. You're going to see her find a grave here in a minute. So I would, for me personally, I think Sarah Torbett is not a suspect. She's just not a plausible suspect, at least, at all. She was 14 when she left, went to Texas, never came back. I think we can close the case on Sarah Torbett. And now on to suspect number two, which is the one most commonly associated with this crazy story. quite frankly. Number 2 is Lucille Clayton. She was the wife of W.Y. Clayton, who was the grandson of Joseph Alexander Clayton. The land had passed down from Joseph Alexander to W.Y.'s father, who I believe his name was John. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. It's in my notes somewhere. I'm not looking at them right now. But it had passed on to him from then. W.Y. was an entrepreneur. He owned a coal yard. He owned a lot of mines. Which brings us to a key point in this story, a discrepancy, shall we say. You remember, went back in the footage. Go ahead and rewind if you want to, but we went to a cave where all these horrible things happened. Well, anyone who's looked at that cave can tell that's not a cave. It's an old mine. This road right here that I'm standing on used to be called Coal Creek Road. There's only one mine or cave on it. That's the one you saw. I don't think it's too far a stretch to think that since this was all W.Y.'s land and he owned a coal yard, he owned several mining operations, that was one of his coal mines. It was definitely a mine of some sort. You can tell by looking at it. And if you look inside, a lot of people say, oh, I see red eyes and all this crap. Well, if the sun hits it right, you've got so much graffiti in there that's orange and red and everything else. When the sun hits it just right, or if you zoom your camera in just right, you're going to pick up that red or that orange, and it's going to look like eyes looking back at you. Trust me. Me and Will, the camera guy, had that same problem earlier. We were zooming in. We saw something. We had to look with our naked eye. Don't go into that cave, mine, whatever. Don't do it. It is on private property that is clearly marked in the film footage from earlier. We stayed on the road. We did not go into the actual mine. The reason you don't go into an old abandoned mine, there's a lot of them. If I need to explain it to you, then, you might need some help. You might need some medication. You might need a good smack upside the head. Whichever one works to get your head straight so you don't go in the damn mine to begin with, we're good on, right? Anyways, W.Y. and Lucille and the Claytons were pillars of this community. They helped build everything that we know now as Alabama City, Gadsden, and Talent. W.Y. unfortunately passed away in 1940. When he passed away, Lucille, his widow, got this property. She lived here until she passed away in 1967. Didn't live any kind of crazy life, didn't do anything nuts. There's no public record of her doing anything just outlandish or anything. She lived here. She raised her kids. She was a backbone of this community. She really was. The Claytons as a whole were a backbone of this community that you have now. So when you're digging into this stuff, you think, how does a lady like that and a lady like Miss Torbett get a crazy story attached to them? Who knows? I think a lot of it, and I get this from different people I've talked to. There's a gentleman that helped us out with this film immensely, named Danny Crownover. He's a local historian. If you want to know anything about the Gadsden area, Etowah County, get a hold of Danny Crownover because he friggin' knows it. He knows everything about this area. Shout out to you, Danny, and thank you so much for your help on the research and everything else. But Mr. Crownover and a friend of his, another historian, who unfortunately has passed away, came out and did an investigation of this without filming and stuff back in the 80s, but they wanted to know the story of, the Hinds Road witch and all that stuff. The historian he was with, whose name escapes my mind, again, I don't have my notes, knew Miss Clayton. He actually knew her. And what I think personally, he backs up, meaning she was a widow in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. She had this huge tract of land in the middle of town. People would come out here, they would trespass, they would do whatever, so she had to be a little bit stern when it came to dealing with trespassers. She had to be assertive. She had to be somebody that people in the area knew would not take any crap off of anyone, so they would stay off her land. To help facilitate this, she did what people had done since the beginning of time. She got her a big, mean, black dog, who was very territorial and didn't like people coming around that weren't supposed to be here. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I do own a black dog. A lot of people own a black dog. Does that make it a hellhound? No. Even a mean black dog, does that make it a hellhound? No. Miss Clayton, to get into the witch side of the thing, there's a church up the road here in Alabama City. It's on Clayton Avenue. That is Clayton Avenue Church, right? That's where she went to church. From all accounts, while not a pious woman, as you might think, she wasn't a pope, praiser. She wasn't, at church every time the doors were open, but she went to church She was a good person. There is absolutely no rumor, fact, fiction, whatever, that can accurately tie her to this incredibly insane, I sold my soul to the devil story. There's just none. Now, we're going to go into a little bit more debunking here. According to the story, you remember this. I told you in 1930 or 32, they burnt the house with her and her dog and her child in there. Well, a lot of her kids, all of them, as a matter of fact, grew up to be adults. Her last child to pass away was Perry Clayton. He's buried in Clayton Cemetery. He passed away in 1996. But the rest of her kids did just fine. I mean, absolutely fine. Led normal lives, worked, did everything. No arrest records, nothing on them. No stories attached to them about this insanity of witches and all this other stuff. So think to yourself, you got a woman who's living here in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, big old tract of land, people coming out trespassing, doing all that. Again, she would have to be assertive. Older people, because back then certain words weren't used in polite company, would probably refer to her as a witch to keep from using a word that rhymes with witch. See what I'm getting at here? Do I really have to peel the layers back on the onion anymore? A kid hears that. He hears two adults talking. They say, hey, Miss Clayton sure is a witch. She's mean. Kid takes that as a literal translation. Oh my gosh, she's a witch. Because when I talk to people who are about my age, I'm 48, the story stayed about the same. It started, as far as we can tell, starting like the 50s, 60s, 70s. The story was pretty much the same. She was a witch that lived on this road. There was no blood drinking, none of that stuff. Just a witch that lived on this road. 1980s, think about this. Think hard about the story I told you. Think really hard about the story I told you, okay? What does it sound like? Some bad person is doing horrible things to kids. An entire town gets together, burns this person alive, swears everybody to secrecy, and a ghost comes up afterwards. Got it in your head? I can tell you right now, Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger. Look at it. It's the same exact story. And this version of the story, ironically enough, came around about the 1980s. I don't think that's coincidence. I think what happened, which is what happens in a lot of areas, folktale starts off as this. Over the years, people add stuff to it, add stuff to it, add stuff to it. So pretty soon, about 30, 40 years, it is nothing resembling the original story that it was based off of at all. There's a big stretch from a witch to being a friggin' cannibal, horrible creature that sold its soul to the devil, and a hellhound. Think about that, a friggin' hellhound, man. How unreal is that? What you have now is a really weird mix of the grim fairy tales, they're full of witches going out in the woods, catching kids, eating them and stuff like that. Freddy Krueger and Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who did what? She drank the blood of virgins to stay young and stay alive. That's what we have now, a weird mix match hodgepodge of these stories that have been brought together for some reason here in Gadsden, Alabama. Now, that's not saying there might not be something out here. We don't know. As long as people are looking for this quote-unquote hellhound and this quote-unquote witch, no one's ever going to know. So I would advise anybody, if you're interested in a haunted history out here, do some investigative work without looking for a witch and a hellhound or kids and all that stuff. It's nonsense. Come out here, do it the right way, clean slate, look, see if you can gather any evidence. Now we're going to throw some more information to you. The story again, 1930 or 32, they burnt the house, blah, blah, blah. Well, as you can see from the pictures we're putting in, this was no shack in the woods. This was a nice friggin' house. I mean, nice. Stone, more than one building, really friggin' nice house. Not a shack in the woods. And, you can take that for whatever you want it to be. Some people are going to debate this and they're going to say, well, that's not the right house, blah, blah, blah. All you have to do, folks, is go through the historical records and look. Been one house out here in this area, one. And, well, that was the Clayton's house, and it certainly was not a small shack in the woods. Maybe 150 years ago it was, but by the time the story came into prominence, which would have been the 50s, like I said, that house was definitely not a shack in the woods. It was a big stone, nice house. You're seeing the footage right now of it. And here's the other thing. According to the story, the house was burned 1930 or 32, depending on which version you hear. Got a newspaper article that's about to pop up where it states that this house actually burned in 1981. 3 guys right here, they were drunk, they were drinking, they started a fire. The house had already been abandoned by then. What happened was when Miss Clayton passed away in 1967, her son Perry lived out here for a little bit, but then, like everybody else, he's got to go to where the work is. So he goes, gets a job, moves out and all that stuff. He would come back and visit the house and take care of the property from time to time. But due to the isolation of this road and the proximity to the town around it, of course, people found, hey, there's an abandoned house. We're going to do stupid stuff. It's what people do. So in 1981, the house burned. It's way after the 1930 or 32 date. And again, it certainly was not a shack in the woods. Pictures prove that. So that's another piece of the debunked puzzle right there that's coming into place to anyone who's reasonable. In summation, now that we've investigated, now that we've gone through newspaper archives, probate, everything else, I think it's pretty safe to say that this story is just that, is a story. Nothing more, nothing less. People get bored, they see something stands out, they make a story up so it makes sense to them. That's what happened here. Nothing less, nothing more. How it got to the point it did, I don't understand to this day, and who would believe that? I have no idea who would believe that crazy story, especially when, again, there is no archival evidence to support any of it. That's the thing. You can check out every resource that we checked out. You can go through yourself, make the phone calls, dig through records, dig through newspapers, all that. You're not going to find anything relating to this story. And people are going to tell you, that's because they hushed it up. That's because, they made sure nobody knew about it. Well, it doesn't explain the fact that Miss Clayton lived here until 1967 when she died. It doesn't explain the fact that the house didn't burn until 1981. The biggest thing that I don't understand is, and maybe somebody out there watching can tell me, how did Sarah Torbett's name get attached to this? The kid was 14. They moved to Texas. Yet 100 years later, her name is somehow attached to this crazy rumor. I wonder if she ever knew about it. Think about it. You're living in Texas in 1950, and somebody tells you that your name's attached to the story. It's crazy. The main reason we did this was when myself and Will, the camera guy, heard this, we were just struck by, how weird it was. We were like, these 2 names attached to this, if it's not true, they need to be cleared. So when we did the research and we found the evidence that you're going to see that clears them, man, that makes us feel really good, because now Miss Clayton and Miss Torbett can be remembered for who they were. Pillars of their communities, family people who would never be attached to anything like this as far as we can tell. We got a lot of people we need to thank for helping us make this video. We're really just delving into longer YouTube videos. You guys who have watched the channel have seen the progression from the very first video to now. We're trying to make it better. Hopefully we are. Hopefully this is a compelling story and it gets you tuning more, because we're going to do more like this. Me and Will have already got a list of stuff that we're going after next, which means more research and more having to memorize stuff. See, right here. I didn't go word by word. I'm not an actor. Bullet points are what I work best by. But anyways, to make this, it took a lot of people. We had to get a lot of help, and because some of the records are kind of sketchy. So I would like to thank, that's why I've got the clipboard, I would like to thank all those involved in researching this story, namely Danny Crownover, the historian I told you about earlier, Craig Scott, who's in charge of, the Gadsden Library, Michael Rogers, the Gadsden Police Department, Sheriff Horton, and Etowah County Sheriff's Department, Gadsden City Library, and the Alabama City branch. There we go. Anyone else who made this video possible, we can't thank you enough. It's been a lot of fun digging through this stuff. We got to see this area here, which is just beautiful, and we ordinarily wouldn't have seen that. So anyways, people, till next time, be safe, be smart, don't do stupid shit. We'll see you on the flip side. blue, blue, blue. What?